The leather of my office chair creaked as I leaned back, staring at the email that had just appeared in my inbox. 25 years of building Meridian Technologies from the ground up, and now this. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly as I read the message again. Something wasn't right about these numbers, and it hadn't been for months. I glanced at the photo on my desk, Sarah and me at our 30th anniversary celebration last year. Her smile seemed different now, more distant than I remembered. The thought gnawed at me, much like the discrepancies in these quarterly reports that kept me at the office well past midnight. Mr. Harrison. Jessica, my executive assistant, appeared in the doorway. Even at this hour, she maintained that professional demeanor that had made her invaluable over the past 5 years. I thought you might want to see this before I head out. She placed a manila folder on my desk, her expression carefully neutral. Too neutral. I'd learned to read people over decades of business dealings, and something in her carefully composed features sent a warning signal through my mind. Thanks, Jessica. You should head home. It's late. Actually, sir. She hesitated, smoothing her skirt with manicured fingers. I think you should look at it now. I opened the folder, and my world shifted on its axis. Bank statements, transfer records, and emails, dozens of them, all pointing to a truth I'd been blind to for far too long. The numbers didn't lie. Someone had been systematically siphoning funds from the company for months, possibly years. But it was the last document that made my blood run cold. A photograph. My wife Sarah, entering the Grand Meridian Hotel. Not alone. With James Chen, my CFO, my friend of 20 years, the godfather to my children. His hand rested on the small of her back with familiar intimacy. I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison, Jessica's voice seemed to come from very far away. I discovered this while preparing the audit reports. There's more. My throat felt like sandpaper. How long have you known? 3 weeks. I needed to be certain before bringing this to you. The financial trail, it's extensive. And there are other photos. I stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the Seattle skyline. The city lights blurred as my mind raced through countless memories, recontextualizing every interaction, every late meeting, every business trip. The signs had been there. I'd chosen not to see them. Sir. Jessica's voice held a note of concern. What would you like me to do? What I wanted to do was burn it all down. Destroy everything James had worked for, just as he destroyed my trust. But decades of business negotiations had taught me the value of patience. Of appearing weak when you're planning your strongest move. Nothing, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. Not yet. I need you to continue as if everything is normal. Can you do that? Of course, Mr. Harrison. She paused at the door. There's one more thing. The corporate retreat next month at the lake house. Mr. Chen has been making some unusual arrangements. Private meetings that aren't on the official schedule. I turned from the window, feeling the weight of the gold wedding band on my finger. Thank you, Jessica. You've done well. Very well indeed. After she left, I sat in the darkness of my office, the damning folder open before me. The photo seemed to mock me. Sarah's smile, so genuine as she looked up at James, was one I hadn't seen directed at me in years. My phone buzzed with a text from her, working late again? Don't forget Emma's graduation planning dinner tomorrow. Emma. Our daughter. The thought of her face, so proud of her upcoming law school graduation, made my chest ache. How much of her life had been built on lies? How many family dinners had we shared while Sarah and James exchanged knowing glances across my own table? I reached for my phone, then stopped. No. This required more than angry confrontations and hasty decisions. I'd built an empire by being 3 steps ahead of my competitors. Now it was time to apply those same skills to my personal life. Opening my laptop, I began to type. Every detail mattered now, every bank statement, every email, every photo. I would document it all. And then, piece by piece, I would dismantle the elaborate deception they'd built around me. The Seattle rain began to fall, pattering against my office window like distant Morse code. I touched the photo on my desk one last time, then turned it face down. In its reflection, I caught a glimpse of my own expression and barely recognized the man staring back. The game was about to change. And this time, I would write the rules. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah: picked up your gray suit from the cleaners for tomorrow. Love you. I stared at those two words until they lost all meaning. Tomorrow, I would smile at my wife across our breakfast table. I would kiss her cheek and thank her for getting my suit. I would go to meetings with James and discuss quarterly projections as if I didn't know he was sleeping with my wife. And I would begin planning how to destroy them both. The elevator doors closed on another sleepless night at Meridian Technologies, but this one was different. This was the night everything changed. The night I stopped being a victim and became something else entirely. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The gray suit felt like armor as I adjusted my tie in the mirror, each movement deliberate and controlled. Sarah's reflection appeared behind me, her hands sliding across my shoulders with practiced familiarity. I watched her fingers smooth non-existent wrinkles, wondering how many times she'd touched James the same way. You seemed restless last night, she said, her green eyes meeting mine in the mirror. Another acquisition keeping you up? The concern in her voice was perfect, too perfect. How many times had I missed that theatrical edge to her performances? Something like that, I replied, covering her hand with mine. Her wedding ring caught the morning light, and I remembered selecting it 30 years ago, young and drunk on dreams of forever. Dad! Emma's voice carried up the stairs, shattering the moment. The restaurant called. They need to push dinner back an hour. Sarah's hand slipped from beneath mine. I'll let James know about the change of plans. My jaw tightened at his name, but I maintained my mask. He's coming tonight? Of course. She was already typing on her phone. He's practically family. The word family twisted in my gut like a serrated blade. I watched her leave the room, noting how she angled her phone away as she texted. Once, I would have called it paranoia. Now, I recognized it as survival instinct. The day crawled by in a haze of meetings and forced normalcy. I sat across from James in the boardroom, studying the man who'd betrayed me while he presented quarterly projections with his usual confidence. Had he always smiled that much? Talked with his hands so expressively? Or was this new, a symptom of whatever he thought he'd won? Exceptional work as always, James, I said when he finished, watching his face for any trace of guilt. There was none. Just that easy smile that had convinced me to trust him with my company, my friendship, my family. Couldn't do it without you, Mike. He clapped my shoulder as he passed, a gesture that once spoke of brotherhood, now tainted by knowledge of his true nature. See you at Marcello's tonight. Sarah says Emma has big news about law school. I smiled, imagining how that same hand had touched my wife, how those same lips had whispered lies. Wouldn't miss it. The restaurant was all warm lighting and discreet luxury, perfect for family celebrations or clandestine meetings. I wondered how many times they'd met here, hiding in plain sight while I worked late at the office they'd turned into their unwitting accomplice. Emma sat between Sarah and me, radiating excitement as she detailed her plans for law school. My beautiful daughter, so like her mother in looks but with my drive, my ambition. I studied her animated features, searching for any sign that she knew, that she was part of their elaborate deception. Berkeley's program is incredible, she was saying, but Columbia has always been my dream. And with the Henderson case making headlines. The Henderson case? James leaned forward, interest sparking in his eyes. The corporate fraud lawsuit? I watched him carefully. Fascinating case. The CEO never saw it coming, trusted his inner circle completely. Family man, devoted husband. They bled him dry for years. Sarah's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. How awful. What happened to them? They're still in court, I said, swirling my scotch. But I hear the CEO had an excellent paper trail. Documented everything once he caught on. Very thorough man. James's smile flickered for just a moment. Sometimes things aren't what they seem in these cases. Corporate law can be complicated. Oh, I'm counting on that, I said softly, then turned to Emma. Speaking of complicated, tell me more about your scholarship applications. The evening unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. We played our parts, the proud parents, the supportive family friend, the ambitious daughter. But beneath the surface, currents of tension swirled like undertow. When Sarah excused herself to the restroom, I noted how James's eyes followed her. How he checked his phone exactly 2 minutes later and made his own excuse. Amateur moves from people who thought they were clever. I turned to Emma, who was absorbed in the dessert menu. Sweetheart, there's something I've been meaning to ask you about the lake house retreat next month. Oh. She looked up, chocolate cake momentarily forgotten. What about it? I'm thinking of making some changes to the usual arrangements. The guest list, specifically. Would you be interested in joining us this year? It might be good experience, seeing how corporate politics work up close. Her eyes lit up. Really? You've never invited me before. Things change, I said, watching Sarah and James return to the table from different directions, their timing just slightly too perfect. Sometimes we need fresh eyes to see what's been right in front of us all along. Later that night, after Sarah had fallen asleep, I stood at our bedroom window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. My phone buzzed with a message from Jessica, financial records from 2019 to 2020 retrieved. You'll want to see these. I typed back, good. Meet me tomorrow, 7 a.m. Time to accelerate the timeline. The lake house retreat was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to gather every thread of their deception and weave it into a noose. 3 weeks to transform from the trusting fool they played me for into something far more dangerous. Sarah murmured in her sleep, and I wondered what she dreamed about. Who she dreamed about. Soon, very soon, they would both learn what it meant to underestimate Michael Harrison. But first, I had a breakfast meeting to prepare for. And based on Jessica's message, tomorrow would bring revelations that would make tonight's discoveries seem like mere shadows of the truth. The morning fog clung to Seattle's waterfront like a shroud, transforming the familiar skyline into something alien and forbidding. I sat in the corner booth of Marcel's cafe, watching steam rise from my untouched coffee while dawn painted the windows in shades of gray. The weight of the leather portfolio beside me seemed to pulse with dark promise, each document inside another nail in the coffin of my former life. Jessica arrived precisely at 7, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with military precision. The shadows under her eyes matched my own, evidence of another sleepless night spent unraveling the tapestry of lies that had become my reality. You look like hell, sir, she said, sliding into the booth. Her usual professional facade had cracked slightly, revealing the weight of what she carried. She placed a slim external hard drive on the table between us. But what I found will make you feel much worse. I studied her face, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she ordered coffee. How deep does it go? Remember that merger with Pacific Ridge Technologies in 2019? She pulled out her laptop, fingers flying across the keys. It wasn't just about market expansion. James used it to create a sophisticated network of shell companies. The money trail, it's like watching a magic trick in reverse. Once you know where to look, you can't unsee the mechanics. The screen filled with spreadsheets, each tab revealing another layer of financial manipulation. But it was the folder labeled "Personal" that made my blood freeze in my veins. "Sarah's been involved from the beginning," Jessica said softly, her voice carrying equal measures of professional detachment and personal sympathy. "The lake house property you think you own? It's been transferred through 3 different holding companies. The final beneficiary is a trust in her name, established 2 months before you even looked at the property." The coffee turned to acid in my stomach. They played me for a long-term mark. "There's more." Jessica hesitated, her finger hovering over the trackpad. "It's about Emma." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "My daughter? Her law school applications. The fees were paid from one of the shell companies. And there's correspondence between Sarah and James about." She paused, visibly struggling with the weight of the revelation. "About ensuring Emma's future security once everything comes to light." The rage that surged through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, a living thing that clawed at my insides, demanding release. My coffee cup shattered in my grip, sending hot liquid and ceramic shards across the table. Jessica didn't flinch, just quietly began cleaning up the mess. "They're planning to take everything," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "The company, the assets, my own daughter." "Yes. But they made mistakes." Jessica's eyes held a fierce intelligence that had made her invaluable as an assistant and now made her essential as an ally. "Arrogance makes people sloppy. They never imagined you'd look closely enough to see the pattern." I pulled out my phone, staring at the family photo that served as my background. Sarah, Emma, and me at last Christmas, all smiles and festive sweaters. A perfect moment captured in pixels, now poisoned by knowledge of what lurked beneath. "The lake house retreat," I said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "That's when they're planning to move." Jessica nodded. "Based on the communications I've intercepted, they've arranged private meetings with key board members. The narrative is already being shaped, concerns about your mental stability, suggestions of erratic behavior. They're painting you as a man losing his grip. While I've been playing the oblivious husband, they've been orchestrating my complete destruction." I looked out at the fog-shrouded city, seeing it with new eyes. "But they forgot something crucial." "What's that?" "I built this company from nothing. I know every dark corner, every skeleton in every closet. A plan was forming in my mind, crystallizing with terrible clarity. And I know things about James that even Sarah doesn't suspect." I turned back to Jessica, seeing my own ruthless determination reflected in her eyes. "We have 3 weeks until the lake house retreat. I need everything, every email, every transaction, every phone record. But most importantly, I need you to help me protect Emma." "Already on it." She pulled out another drive. "These are records of James's previous indiscretions. 3 failed marriages, each ending with similar patterns of financial manipulation. And there's something else you should see about Sarah's visits to Zurich last year." The cafe was filling with morning commuters, their mundane conversations creating a surreal backdrop to the systematic dismantling of my life's foundations. I thought of Sarah sleeping peacefully in our bed, of Emma excitedly planning her law school future, of James confidently orchestrating my downfall. "Send everything to my secure server," I said, standing. "And Jessica? Thank you. When this is over." "I know." She smiled, a sharp expression that held no warmth. "I've already arranged to be out of the country when it all comes down." Plausible deniability. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Lunch today? Miss you." I stared at the words, marveling at her ability to maintain the fiction even now. Another message followed from Emma. "Dad, can we talk about the lake house plans?" So excited. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, composure warring with rage. Finally, I typed responses dripping with normalcy, each word a stone added to the foundation of their false security. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing a city I no longer recognized. Or perhaps I was finally seeing it clearly, a battlefield where every smile concealed a strategy, every touch masked a betrayal. Let them think they had 3 weeks to spring their trap. My countdown had already begun. The razor sliced through morning stubble with surgical precision as I watched my reflection transform. Each stroke revealed another facet of the stranger I was becoming, a man carved from ice and calculation, shedding the soft flesh of trust like a snake molting last season's skin. The bathroom mirror had become my confessional, the only place I allowed myself to see the truth burning in my eyes. Sarah's perfume still lingered in the steamy air, Chanel No. 5 mixing with betrayal to create a uniquely nauseating cocktail. I'd watched her dress for work earlier, each gesture a performance of domestic contentment. She'd kissed my cheek, promised to be home early, called me darling with practiced affection. I'd smiled, complimented her dress, played my role in our theater of lies while darkness coiled in my chest like a serpent waiting to strike. My phone vibrated, Jessica's hourly update. The pieces were falling into place with devastating efficiency. Board member Douglas Wright had taken our bait, eagerly sharing details of James's private meetings in exchange for implied protection from the coming storm. The old wolf thought he was saving himself. He didn't realize he was just another pawn in a game whose true scope he couldn't begin to comprehend. I dried my face, studying the map of fine lines around my eyes, tributaries of worry carved by years of blind trust. The man in the mirror looked older than he had a week ago, but his eyes held something new. Something dangerous. Dad? Emma's voice carried through the door, innocent and piercing. You've got a minute? I adjusted my tie, secured my mask of normalcy. Come in, sweetheart. She bounded in with that explosive energy that had characterized her since childhood, law school acceptance letters clutched in her hands. The sight of her, so much like Sarah at that age, so earnest and untouched by cynicism, sent a fresh wave of pain through my carefully constructed armor. I've been thinking about what you said, about the lake house retreat, she began, perching on the marble counter. I did some research on the Henderson case you mentioned at dinner. The parallel strategies of corporate takeover and personal betrayal. Brilliant material for my thesis. My hand froze on my collar. There it was, a flash of something in her eyes, quick but unmistakable. Not innocence. Calculation. Fascinating case, I said carefully, watching her reflection. The betrayal caught everyone by surprise. Did it though? She tilted her head, studying me with an intelligence that suddenly seemed less academic and more predatory. Looking at the evidence, there were warning signs. The CEO just chose not to see them. The air between us crystallized with unspoken understanding. In that moment, I saw Sarah's careful manipulation and James's strategic mind reflected in my daughter's analytical gaze. They hadn't just corrupted my marriage and threatened my company, they'd been grooming my own flesh and blood to participate in my destruction. Sometimes, I said, selecting each word like a chess piece, people see exactly what's happening. They just wait for the right moment to show their hand. Emma's smile flickered, a micro-expression of uncertainty that validated weeks of surveillance and painful revelation. Jessica's latest intelligence hadn't been wrong. The encrypted emails, the private meetings with James's legal team, the carefully orchestrated coincidences that placed Emma in the perfect position to challenge my mental competency when the time came. My daughter had become their secret weapon, their insurance policy against my retaliation. They'd shaped her with the patience of sculptors, carving away at her loyalty until it resembled their own twisted version of love. The lake house retreat, she said, sliding off the counter. It's going to be interesting, isn't it? More than you can imagine. I straightened my tie one final time, letting her see just enough of the wolf behind my eyes to plant a seed of doubt. Everything's going to change. After she left, I pressed my forehead against the cool mirror, allowing myself exactly 30 seconds of grief for the father I used to be, the daughter I thought I had. When I straightened, the man in the reflection had shed another layer of humanity. My phone buzzed again. James, this time. Emergency board meeting at 11. Q2 projections need revision. Of course they did. Today was the day they planned to begin questioning my judgment publicly, subtly undermining my authority while strengthening their position for the Lake House coup. They'd orchestrated everything perfectly, building their case with the precision of master architects. But they'd forgotten something crucial about wolves caught in traps. Sometimes they gnaw off their own limb to survive, emerging stronger, more dangerous, untamed by pain. I clicked out a reply, each letter another piece of bait. See you there. Bringing Emma's law school advisor, wants to discuss corporate law program sponsorship. Let them think their plan was working. Let them believe their puppet strings still held firm. In less than an hour, I would sit across from James in the boardroom, watching him present doctored projections while my own carefully crafted time bombs began to detonate throughout his elaborately constructed house of cards. The mirror held my gaze one final time, reflecting not the successful businessman they'd marked for destruction, but something far more lethal, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to destroy. I straightened my cuffs, each movement precise and controlled. The board meeting awaited. And with it, the first act of a revenge so complete it would salt the earth where their dreams once grew. Sarah's Chanel No. 5 still hung in the air, but now it smelled different. It smelled like victory. The boardroom had always been my arena, my coliseum of corporate conquest. Now, watching James arrange his papers with practiced precision, I saw it for what it truly was, a snake pit where loyalty died beneath the weight of ambition. The mahogany table gleamed like spilled blood under the morning sun, reflecting distorted versions of the faces gathered around it. 12 apostles at my Last Supper, each waiting to see who would play Judas first. I let my gaze drift across them, these men and women who'd shared victories and defeats with me for decades. Douglas Wright, sweating slightly as he avoided my eyes, knowing his betrayal was just one thread in a tapestry of deception. Barbara Chen, James's sister, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping an anxious rhythm on her tablet. The others, all carefully positioned like chess pieces, unaware they were playing a game whose rules had changed beneath their feet. Before we begin, I said, my voice carrying the weight of authority they thought they were about to strip from me, I'd like to introduce Professor Catherine Marshall from Columbia Law School. The woman beside me nodded, her silver hair and steel-rimmed glasses lending gravitas to her role. What none of them knew, not even James with all his careful planning, was that Catherine had been my mother's closest friend before cancer claimed her 30 years ago. She'd watched me build Meridian from nothing, had guided Emma's early interest in law, and now sat ready to detonate the first explosive in my carefully constructed counterattack. Professor Marshall has some interesting insights into corporate governance and fiduciary responsibility, I continued, watching James's face for the first crack in his composure. Particularly regarding the Henderson case. There it was, a microscopic tightening around his eyes, a slight pause in his rhythmic paper shuffling. He'd studied that case extensively while planning my downfall, using it as a template for his own machinations. But he'd missed crucial details, blinded by the same arrogance that now threatened to unravel everything. Fascinating case, Catherine said, her academic tone belying the predatory gleam in her eyes. Particularly the international banking aspects. The Zurich connections. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Barbara Chen's fingers stopped their nervous dance. Down the table, Douglas Wright's tie suddenly seemed too tight, his collar a noose of his own making. James recovered quickly, but I'd seen the fear flash across his face. Perhaps we should focus on the quarterly projections first, he suggested, reaching for control that was already slipping away. We have some concerns about recent investment strategies. Yes, let's discuss investments, I interrupted, sliding folders across the gleaming mahogany. Specifically, the Pacific Ridge merger and subsequent offshore transactions. Professor Marshall has prepared a detailed analysis. The folders opened like Pandora's boxes, releasing demons crafted from spreadsheets and bank transfers. I watched their faces as realization dawned, not just of James's betrayal, but of their own complicity in what was about to unfold. "This is unnecessary," James said, but his voice had lost its usual smooth confidence. "Mike, if you have concerns." Concerns? The word tasted like ash in my mouth. An interesting choice of words from a man who's been orchestrating my professional and personal destruction for years. "Tell me, James, how's the lake house renovation coming along? The one Sarah thinks I don't know about." The blood drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. Behind him, Barbara Chen was already reaching for her phone, likely trying to warn Sarah. But that path had been cut off hours ago, thanks to Jessica's meticulous planning. "What you're about to see," I continued, nodding to Catherine, "is evidence of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. But more importantly, you're about to understand exactly how expendable James considered all of you in his grand design." The presentation that followed was a masterpiece of destruction, each slide another nail in the coffin of their conspiracy. Bank records, email chains, phone logs, a tapestry of treachery woven with threads of greed and hubris. I watched their faces shift from confusion to horror to the desperate calculation of self-preservation. "This is a witch hunt," James finally sputtered, but the words fell flat against the weight of evidence crushing him. "These documents are authenticated by 3 independent forensic accounting firms," Catherine cut in, her academic demeanor hardening into something more prosecutorial. "Your sister's involvement in the Pacific Ridge shell companies was particularly clever. Tell me, Ms. Chen, did you really think the Zurich accounts wouldn't be traced?" Barbara's face crumbled like wet paper. In that moment, I saw James realize his carefully constructed house of cards wasn't just falling, it was being systematically incinerated. "Mike," he tried one last time, reaching for decades of friendship like a drowning man grasping at smoke. "Think about Emma. About Sarah. We can discuss this. The time for discussion ended the moment you involved my daughter in your schemes." My voice carried all the warmth of a Siberian winter. "The board will receive formal documentation within the hour. The SEC has already been notified. And Sarah." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "Sarah will learn about all of this exactly when and how I choose." The next hour transformed the boardroom into a battlefield of desperate alliances and crumbling loyalties. One by one, they turned on James, each trying to salvage what they could from the wreckage of their careers. I watched him age years in minutes, his carefully crafted world disintegrating beneath the weight of his own ambition. As security escorts cleared the room, Catherine touched my arm. "Michael, are you sure about the lake house? It's not too late to." "Everything proceeds as planned," I said, watching James's retreating back. "This was just the opening move. The real endgame happens at the retreat." My phone buzzed, Emma asking about dinner plans, her message a masterpiece of calculated innocence. Another from Sarah, worried about James not answering her calls. The pieces were falling exactly where I needed them. The boardroom emptied, leaving me alone with the ghosts of betrayal and the first taste of vengeance. In the window's reflection, I barely recognized myself, a man transformed by pain into something harder, deadlier, more precise in his cruelty. The lake house retreat was still coming, but now the trap would spring differently than they'd planned. Let them scramble, let them panic, let them taste the fear they'd been feeding me for years. The real revelation was still to come. The lake house emerged from the twilight mist like a memory of paradise lost, its windows blazing against the gathering darkness. I stood at the edge of the property, watching shadows move behind the glass, players gathering for the final act of a tragedy they didn't know they were starring in. The air held the sharp bite of autumn, carrying the scent of pine and prophecy across waters that had witnessed 3 decades of family celebrations, each one now revealed as another carefully crafted lie. My phone vibrated one last time, Jessica's final confirmation. Every piece was in place, every escape route sealed, every digital trail leading to this moment crystallized in servers across 3 continents. I switched it off, severing the last tether to the outside world. Tonight would unfold in its own universe of revenge and revelation. Sarah had arrived first, of course. Always the perfect hostess, arranging flowers and champagne for a celebration that would become a requiem. James followed an hour later, his silver Porsche now parked beside her BMW like a metaphor for their imagined future. Emma came last, her law school acceptance letters carefully packed alongside documents meant to destroy me. I touched the thumb drive in my pocket, a tiny thing to hold such devastating truth. In it, every secret, every betrayal, every calculated move they'd made against me, transformed into a weapon that would shatter their illusions with surgical precision. The front door opened at my touch, spilling warm light and fake laughter into the night. I stood for a moment in the threshold, absorbing the tableau before me, Sarah in her favorite blue dress, the one she'd worn when we first visited this property, James lounging with practiced ease on the sofa we'd chosen together years ago, Emma perched on the arm of a chair, her youth a mask for the calculating mind beneath. Dad! Emma's smile was perfect, practiced, poisonous. We were getting worried. Traffic, I said, watching their faces for the micro-expressions that betrayed their true thoughts. Had to make a few stops. Picking up old memories. Sarah approached with a glass of champagne, her perfume, Chanel No. 5, now carrying notes of desperation beneath its familiar elegance. You're just in time. James was about to toast to Emma's future. Was he? I accepted the glass, noting how her hand trembled slightly. Interesting timing. I have something to share about futures too. I moved to the fireplace, running my fingers along the mantel where family photos tracked the progression of our lives, holidays, graduations, anniversaries. Each frame a window into moments that meant something entirely different now. Before we begin, I said, turning to face my audience of traders, I'd like to tell you a story. It's about a man who built an empire from nothing, who trusted blindly, who loved completely. I paused, watching James shift uncomfortably. It's also about wolves who mistook patience for weakness, who thought they could rewrite history with forged documents and offshore accounts. The room temperature seemed to plummet. Sarah's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Emma's casual pose became a statue of uncertainty. Michael, James started, reaching for control with his silver-tongued charm, you're obviously stressed. We've all been concerned. Concerned enough to plan my removal from my own company? I connected my laptop to the massive TV screen, watching their faces as their carefully orchestrated plans appeared in high definition. Concerned enough to groom my daughter as a weapon against me? To use this very house as the stage for my professional execution? The documents scrolled endlessly, bank transfers, encrypted emails, phone logs. The architecture of betrayal laid bare in pixels and data. Daddy, Emma tried, her voice small and young suddenly, stripped of its legal precision. Let me explain. Explain what? How they convinced you to betray your own father. Or how you rationalized it as protecting the company's interests. I turned to Sarah, who had sunk onto the sofa, her face ash white. Or perhaps your mother should explain her trips to Zurich. The accounts she thought were invisible. James stood, desperation crackling off him like static electricity. Think about what you're doing, Mike. Think about Emma's future. I've thought of nothing else, I said softly, pressing another button. New documents filled the screen, evidence of James's previous marriages, his pattern of destruction, the carefully hidden bodies of his corporate victims. Did you tell Sarah about the others? The wives you groomed and discarded? The companies you hollowed out and left for dead? Sarah's champagne glass shattered on the hardwood floor, crystal tears spreading like the truth I was spilling across their perfect plan. Everything you built, I continued, each word another nail in their coffin of consequences, every scheme, every backup plan, every escape route, I've spent months dismantling them all. The offshore accounts. Frozen. The bored allies. Singing to the SEC. The lake house. I smiled, a cold expression that felt foreign on my face. Check the deed. Emma stood abruptly, legal training asserting itself through the shock. You can't prove. I already have. I turned to her, my heart breaking beneath its armor of revenge. Check your law school acceptances. Check the real source of your scholarship funds. Everything you thought was secure, every promise they made about your future, it was all built on sand. And the tide just came in. The next hour unfolded like a Greek tragedy, each revelation another stroke of the knife. I watched them crumble, Sarah's perfectly maintained facade cracking like old porcelain, James's desperation turning to rage then to defeated acceptance, Emma's youthful certainty dissolving into the tears of a child who finally understood the cost of her choices. As security teams arrived, carefully chosen, utterly loyal, to escort James to waiting federal agents, as Sarah's carefully packed bags were discovered in her car's trunk, as Emma's future imploded in a cascade of rescinded acceptances and criminal investigations, I stood at the lake house window, watching darkness claim the water. Was it worth it? Sarah asked finally, her voice hollow with the knowledge of everything she'd lost. Destroying all of us to save yourself? I turned to her, seeing not the woman I'd loved for 30 years, but a stranger wearing her face. I didn't destroy anything. I just revealed what was already broken. I handed her divorce papers, each page a death certificate for our shared dreams. You all did the rest yourselves. Later, standing alone in the empty house, I raised my glass to the ghosts of what we'd been. The champagne tasted of ashes and victory, of endings and beginnings, of a future stripped of illusions but also free of lies. My phone powered back on, filling with messages from a world forever changed. But one caught my eye, Jessica, ever efficient, Paris office secured. New life awaiting your arrival. I looked around one last time at the battlefield of broken trust and shattered alliances. Then I walked out, leaving behind the man I'd been, the family I'd lost, the lies I'd believed. The night air carried the scent of pine and prophecy, but now it smelled different. It smelled like freedom.